We're now live.
Okay. This is Senate Appropriations Committee, and we're taking testimony from the Agency of Natural Resources regarding their 2023 budget request. So we have Secretary Moore from the Secretary's office, and we have Commissioner Walk, Commissioner of Environmental Conservation. And we have again, Kleinfelter and Tracy LaFrance. Anyone else with you today?
Not that I'm aware of, although
And
I can only say
Joanna
subset.
Polito is here as well.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Oh, hi, Joanne. You're on my other screen. So I'm going to let you get started, Secretary Moore. I know that there's a lot of things going on in your realm, and that'll tie into budget recommendations. So we look forward to having you kind of set the framework for the agency. And then I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from DEC, because I suspect quite a bit of that is going to be in the DEC portfolio, wheelhouse, whatever you want to call it. I hate that term, wheelhouse, just to let you know.
All
So
right.
welcome.
Thank you. Do I have the ability to share my screen?
Chrissy will, I'm sure,
Yes,
take care
you
of
do.
that.
You have the ability to share.
All right, fantastic. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. As many of you may know, Emily Byrne, the agency's CFO, left state government in the middle of January to join the Burlington Electric Department. And I am pleased to have Megan Kleinfelder with me today. Megan is our Assistant Director of Administrative Services, but is currently our acting director while we are out for recruitment to fill Emily's very big shoes. I thought I could start today by giving you sort of a top line overview of the A&R budget, speak specifically to position changes, get into a little more detail about the central office budget, flag our progress on a handful of significant ongoing initiatives, and then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Walk and his team to review DEC's budget. And understand we'll be back, I think same time next week, perhaps, to talk more about the Fish and Wildlife and FPR budgets. So at the highest level, the agency's budget for FY23 is a proposed $190 million. This is about a $7.5 million increase above our FY22 budget, or 4%. This budget supports 600 full-time employees, and A&R, I believe, has the most significant seasonal workforce in state government, largely a function of running the state's 55 state parks. But we have a total of 400 seasonal employees, some in each of our 3 departments. About 2/3 of the agency's overall budget is pass-through money that goes out the door as grants, contracts, and loans each year. And about 80% of our overall budget is comprised of federal and special funds. The budget before you fully utilizes the available balances and from these federal and special fund accounts. But these accounts have not fully kept up with inflation. In particular, our federal funding has been stagnant for more than 10 years at this point. And as a result, about 45% of the upward pressure in the agency budget this year is being absorbed by the general fund. We're seeing about a 10% increase in the general fund allocation to the agency, which is $3.3 million. In terms of how that $190 million breaks out across the different parts of the agency, the central office or secretary's office is a small piece of about $6 million. The lion's share of the agency's budget actually does sit within the Department of Environmental Conservation, as you alluded to, Senator Kitchell, and reflects several major grant and loan programs that are administered.
Should I point something out? You have a typo on your
I do.
slide. Yes,
Whereabouts?
environmental.
Thank you. I will fix that. Yes. Let's see. Oh, and then the other piece is the pilot payment, and that is
Don't worry. My husband says if there's something that's not quite right, he can rely on me to point it out. So
I appreciate your pointing it out, because otherwise it'll just get repeated in ad infinitum, because I tend to just borrow from one to move to the next. So I will fix that. The other piece is the pilot payment, which is the payment in lieu of taxes. And this is the payment ANR administers to municipalities for state-owned lands. As you may recall, ANR owns about 350,000 acres of land statewide. There was a requirement this year for us to recalculate the base payment, and in the pilot program, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes' time. This is just another way to sort of slice and dice our budget that shows, if you look to the right-hand side of this chart, about half of our funds are special funds, and there's a whole bevy of them. And then about a third of our budget is those federal funds, and that smallish stripe in the middle represents our general fund allocation. The biggest change in positions, both in the agency and certainly within the central office, that's contained in the FY23 budget is the creation of a Vermont Office of Climate Action. This will add 3 new positions, reorganize some existing positions within the agency, and provide ongoing funding for what had been a limited service position set to expire at the end of the current fiscal year. In addition to the Office of Climate Action, and I'll give you some more detail on that in a moment, our budget expands our civil rights and compliance and environmental justice coordinator position to become full-time. This was a new position in the FY22 budget and had been a part-time role. It creates a position within DEC to implement some new federal drinking water requirements. And we continue to use vacancy savings as a budget management tool. DEC has specifically identified one position that is likely to be held open for all of FY23, and we'll let Commissioner Walk speak to that.
Okay.
This is just another way to look at those position changes. The thing that is noteworthy here is the significant number of limited service positions the agency has as a result of the ARPA funding that we are administering. There's 28 in total. The vast majority of them are within DEC, although there are 2 that relate to the regulatory functions performed by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the planning office, which is here in the as part of my team in the central office. And these positions are a combination of direct programmatic support for some of the water infrastructure initiatives, along with ensuring sufficient regulatory capacity throughout the agency, anticipating a significant increase in the number of projects we will be reviewing, both as a result of the water infrastructure investments, but also investments in housing and broadband that are being funded with ARPA dollars as well.
And what about the other federal legislation on the infrastructure jobs and infrastructure and jobs? There's water quality and I think other funding buckets there as well.
There are.
I guess probably you'll be speaking to that because those dollars also bring match requirements.
They do, and we recognize those, and I will speak to them. But you are correct, Senator Kitchell. We're anticipating approximately $350 million into our state revolving fund, spread out over the next 5 years as a result of the Infrastructure Jobs Act. There's also money for environmental remediation, both Superfund sites and brownfields remediation work. And some more modest dollars available for climate change and resilience initiatives, although I think the bulk of the anticipated federal investment in those spaces was being held in as part of the Build Back Better bill, whose fate's a little uncertain at this point.
Okay. Well, 350 million is not shabby.
No, it's nothing to sneeze at for certain. So I'm going to talk in a little more detail about the ANR central office budget, and then happy to talk about ARPA or IIJA. A lot of the ARPA work is actually baked into the DEC budget at this point, since they're the lead entity when it comes to the water infrastructure investments. The central office budget, it has a proposed increase of $1.1 million this year. Obviously, that's incredibly significant in the scheme of our $6.5 million budget. This includes base budget pressure, but the majority of those funds is going to the creation of this Vermont Office of Climate Action. In terms of what's in the Vermont Office of Climate Action, the working premise here is to create a much needed long-term intergovernmental structure for coordinating the work of state government when it comes to the implementation of climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience strategies. In addition, the Global Warming Solutions Act has some pretty specific requirements about monitoring, tracking, assessment, and evaluation. And this climate office will lead those efforts, which in turn means our ability to report back to the General Assembly and to the Vermont public writ large about the work we have done to achieve the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. So there are several existing positions within the agency that will be redirected or moved into this Office of Climate Action. The two positions that were created as part of establishing the Global Warming Solutions Act, which was our director, and then our community resilient, what we're calling now our community resilience specialist. In addition, there are folks within DEC who maintain our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, among other tasks. Who will join the climate office. And then we currently have a climate forester position within FPR that will be brought in to be part of the climate office. This is the position that is funded with grant funding that is set to expire at the end of the current fiscal year. In addition, the governor's budget includes funding for 3 new positions: a data manager, a community engagement and reporting lead, and an economic and policy analyst. The work of the climate office will be supported by an advisory board comprised of representatives of the relevant agencies of state government, along with the state climatologist, which is a NOAA designated position at the University of Vermont. The budget for this is an additional $650,000 beyond the $450,000 base appropriation that the agency began to receive in fiscal year 21. This funding covers staff costs, program operations, per diems for climate counselors, overhead, as well as a modest amount of ongoing contractor support. In addition, as you may recall, there was a significant one-time appropriation in the FY21 budget adjustment of $1 million that was used to provide support for technical analyses and contractors that led our outreach and engagement efforts. There's an additional request for one-time funds of $75,000 that's included in the governor's FY23 budget. And we believe that coupled with the balance of the FY21 BAA allocation and the allowance for some contractor support in our base budget is sufficient to complete the 2 remaining outstanding technical analyses required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, which are the development of a municipal vulnerability index, and then building this system to support the ongoing tracking, monitoring, and assessment efforts. In addition, the agency has some really significant ongoing initiatives, several of which were funded with one-time resources by the General Assembly last session, and several of which are just ongoing efforts. Obviously, our ongoing implementation of Vermont's Clean Water Act is really significant. Our clean water budget is projected to be up again in FY23 as a result of the positive performance of the property transfer tax, meals and rooms tax, and the unclaimed bottle deposits all. We're anticipating almost a 10% increase in the dollars available. Included in the FY22 budget was $10 million a year of ARPA funds for FY22, 23, and 24, and that is also reflected in this $46.9 million projected budget for FY23. Our efforts around monitoring and response to perfluorinated compounds continue and are being led by the Department of Environmental Conservation. We continue to do a lot of work to expand outdoor recreation offerings, and the governor's budget includes a second year of significant funding for the community grants program that Commissioner Snyder can speak about in more detail. In addition, there were these one-time appropriations from the General Assembly in FY22, including funds for brownfields remediation, to make investments in state lands and specifically focusing on access and accessibility at fishing areas, wildlife management areas, and state forests, some dam safety improvements for state-owned dams, as well as the PCB testing in Vermont schools initiative that kicked off within the last couple of weeks. The agency has also made significant progress in the ARPA investments that were programmed for ANR in the FY22 budget. As you may recall, there was $100 million allocated, and the governor is recommending $72 million in additional funding for these same 6 initiatives in his FY23 budget. So I'm going to pause there, happy to answer any questions you have. And also happy to turn the talking stick if you'd like over to Commissioner Walk to review the DEC budget.
Okay. Other questions right now? I think probably not. I see Senator Starr, I realize, is bounced off, so he's joining us by phone. I don't see any questions. Could you speak more about the new office that you're creating? Obviously, as with so many initiatives now, they transcend multiple departments, multiple programs, and people sort of have a hard time saying, oh, you're doing what, you're doing what. And so, and yet that's how it has to be. The bigger question ultimately is, how do you, what oversight do you provide? Where is that locus of accountability in terms of the work that's supposed to be done, even though it might be done other than within your agency? And so I know that a major initiative such as this really requires some administrative attention and leadership. So are you anticipating how is that going to work relative to the rest of state government in terms of what you're doing, transportation's doing, what ag is doing? Probably the list could go on. DCF as it relates to weatherization.
Yes.
So if you could just give a sense of how you envision, because sometimes we have, the dilemma is when everything is so distributed, which in this case has to be because it really gets into different areas of either government or expertise, but it's hard to be clear on accountability.
Yeah.
And so I wondered if you could just speak to that relative to the role this new office would be given.
Sure, happy to. So I think this office is very much of the same sort of design that we've used rather successfully, I would offer, in the clean water space, where there's a cadre of staff, and clean water also located within ANR, but in that instance within DEC, that provides that sort of data management and reporting function, which is really the way we bring together the expertise of all of the agencies of state government. So the individual programs remain housed where the technical expertise lies. So in the instance of this climate office, we'll continue to rely on the Department of Public Service, as well as DCF, as you noted, Senator Kitchell, the Ag Agency, the Transportation Agency, among others, to continue to lead their different initiatives, but then have an intentional structure in place that brings all of the agencies together, gives a forum for discussing relative priorities, gives us the opportunity to look collectively at data on the progress that's being made and adjustments that may need to be contemplated in order to bring recommendations both to the governor's office, but also back to the General Assembly and the Climate Council. And so I think it's trying to sort of have the best of both worlds, recognizing the depth of experience and expertise in some of these programmatic areas that exists within individual agencies, as well as the need to be able to roll all of that good work up into a comprehensive report that can then be compared to our progress against the greenhouse gas emissions inventory and the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Other questions, committee? I know we have 2 people on the phone. I see Senator Walk's house, Commissioner Walk's house must be a little warmer today. The last time he seemed to be somewhat bundled
Could we
up.
ask a little bit about the PCB testing, around the state, or should
Yeah, that's
Commissioner Watt.
fine. I'll, whether the commissioner or the secretary wants to take that question. You're talking about the testing in schools and water testing as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Peter, would you like
I'm
to?
happy to take those questions.
Yep.
What's your question?
Oh, well, I just wondered if that's set up and when that's going to get started, or if it is started, and the guidelines that are going to be followed, so we don't get into the situation like we did in Burlington and spend a whole lot of money to move them out or to fix up their present high school rooms. So I was wondering if we could learn a little bit more about that. That's all.
Okay. And that also gets into the standard being used.
Yes.
I'm happy to chat about that briefly. So for the record, I'm Peter Walk. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. In partnership with the Agency of Education and the Department of Health, we have been working on developing essentially a support to the school system via testing standards and then sort of mitigation and remediation measure recommendations to provide to schools to do the testing that you obligated them to in last year's budget. So as just a bit of history, the governor put in his recommend an additional $5 million to support testing for PCBs in schools. At the end of the session, language was added to the budget that would make that testing mandatory, and that yes, to make it mandatory. And so what we have been working to do is to develop sort of what happens. How does a school do this? How do we support them? What do we do when they find PCBs at different levels, at different approaches? Because there are two sort of general paths. There's the full sort of remediation path, which is to look at how to solve for and remove prevent PCBs from being present in the school. And then there's also opportunities to mitigate low levels of PCBs by different coatings and other things, similar to say lead paint. Oftentimes, if we can seal that in place, then the PCBs aren't off gassing into the indoor air, which is what we're concerned about here. And so we wanted to make sure that we had that well thought out, and also had enough contractors on board to do the testing. As you'll recall, as we were discussing it last session, the testing isn't as simple as sort of, as some of the lead in schools testing we did a few years ago. You have to design sort of which rooms are most likely to be impacted and how to test those. And that creates a sort of study design that is beyond sort of just sending a contractor out to take a couple samples and be done and move on to the next school. They need to look at the school building design, figure out where potential risks are, and then work through that study. And so that it's going to take some time. I think that's why we recommended a 2024 deadline for that testing to occur, because it's going to take some time to do that. Whether we are doing it on behalf of schools or in support of schools, or whether a school determines to do that on their own. And then, as you mentioned, the standards question is one that and I would encourage you to hear from the Department of Health when they're in here doing their testimony about the way in which they've evaluated the standards that they use to support the PCB testing in schools, where they've gone to do additional analysis of federal data and other systems that are in place to be able to understand what some of the ways in which the risks associated with these hazards can be managed, and how to account for those. And that's the reason why the standards have been updated to reflect that further analysis. And obviously, whenever we as state government change standards, people get concerned for multiple reasons. And I think this is it's important that we talk about how we are constantly looking at what the standards we use are to make sure that we're following the best available science and being as protective as possible in a way that people know how to meet and can do so. So happy to give you some more information offline, Senator Starr. We do have we did release some information out to the public and to the school communities last week in the form of a press release with some information that I can share with the committee, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So the testing has actually started, Peter?
The testing, our contracted supported testing has not officially started yet. We had a lot of work to get to the point where we could roll it out, including the challenging workforce challenges we have in our own team. It's been hard to fill a lot of positions. Joanna and Tracy's team know that especially well. I think you probably heard this from other quarters. Filling financial positions, which are critical to all of the work that we do, has been incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, sorry, Senator Starr?
But the standards have all been set, so we know the school districts know what the new standards are, and that's all set. So then the next phase would be to get contractors on board, I believe.
Yep, the contractors are on board. It's a question of setting a schedule for what we believe would be the highest risk schools, and to get the testing out to those schools first, and to work with those schools to do that. We're working with various schools, sort of the educational stakeholder world, to try to figure out how to roll that out and make sure that we're getting as good of information as possible to schools and supervisory unions and all of the like. So lots of work to be done there, and the team has done a really nice job kind of pulling all that together, including a survey of the schools to confirm information about which schools would be required to test, because as you recall, it was schools that were either built or renovated prior to 1980, when PCBs were phased out.
Other questions? So Secretary Moore, you've given the sort of the overview from the Secretary's office. Do you have more, or should we get into the DEC arena, which obviously is about half of the agency? So there's quite a bit of budget related testimony, I guess, that we would get from your commissioner here. Other questions then of the Secretary Moore? If not, then we'll move in to DEC specifically.
I'll just flag for you, Senator Kitchell. I do have to drop off at 2 p.m. to testify in Senate institutions, but we'll stay here as long as I'm able.
Well, we certainly wouldn't want to hold you up from that. But of course, we have the ultimate, because they can only propose and we appropriate. So I hope.
That's why I'm here first.
A lot of people don't know that really we have the capital bill and we have the transportation bill, but nothing gets appropriated except through the budget. So ultimately it all comes, I would say, to the corner suite, but we're not there yet. Although I guess we're going to be perhaps back in Montpelier after a town meeting. So I'm looking forward to getting back. Commissioner Walk, then, if you want to start, one of the questions, and we've been getting, and it obviously crosses departments, Department of Health as well, and that is, well, we're talking about PFAS, and that is in water supplies and some of the other contaminants, and how your budget and how the work with the Department of Health is sort of coming together in terms of the that clean water initiative, which is sort of was there on your plate to deal with before we even got into the the global solution, climate solution. So if you could speak to that as well in terms of how we're doing. Money into the fund is improve because of the revenue streams. Particularly the people are eating out apparently, and so rooms and meals has been good. Our consumption revenues have been very good and strong. So this is an opportunity to make some real progress. So I'd like to hear about that as well.
I might give Secretary Moore the opportunity to speak to that specific piece, our clean water progress, and given that she is really the agency's lead across the board on that piece, if
Okay.
she wants to
All
speak
right.
that quickly.
Sure. Happy to. So we do produce this annual performance report. The most recent version was published just about a month ago right now. Emily Bird, who's in DEC, is the lead author on that report. I will, once done speaking, drop the link to it in the chat, but would encourage you to hear from her directly. We are continuing to make significant progress that is documented in that report, and also in our ability to actually account for the impact the investments we are making are having on water quality, which has been a challenge. You know, we've had long track records of knowing how to measure phosphorus in wastewater and stormwater. We've learned a lot over the last 5 to 10 years around how to measure phosphorus in agriculture, but some of the natural resources restoration projects have been a little bit elusive in terms of trying to quantify the impacts they're having for clean water. And we're getting there. And that's a pretty exciting development from my perspective. Also, as you flagged, the resources we have available right now for this work are unprecedented. When I had started with the Clean and Clear program a dozen years ago, my goal at one point was to have $1 million of funding for projects. And to look at the budget today and have almost 47 million is just, it's a bit staggering when you think about it. But the impact is really, it's gaining. And
Is this the report that does it by watershed so that we can look and track okay. That's a very good report. So it'll be good to see the updated version of that.
Yeah, so I'll drop that in the chat, and I'm sure Emily would love to be able to come in and provide an overview of some of the highlights from the past year.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's something you're interested in, we'd be happy to arrange that, because I think they do benefit from a walkthrough of that money, if you'd like.
Yeah, well, so often, you know, we are making these investments, appropriating money. And the important thing is, are we getting the outcomes we wanted? Are we making progress? Where the other thing that's really important to people is, you know, around, what does that look like around the state? And, you know, I live in Danville, but most people in Danville don't think that the headwaters of the Winooski and the Lamoille are right here. And so everything goes to Chittenden County, including our phosphorus, but they don't. So we tend to be a little, you know, sometimes provincial in our view, but I think this does really help everybody seeing where those investments are, how they're benefiting, and so that updated report will be very helpful. And I did read the report on Lake Carmi, and that wasn't very encouraging. I realized that there were some technical details and so forth, but it looked like we were actually losing ground, unless maybe you've got a better spin, and maybe my conclusion is not correct, but I just wondered if you could speak to that.
Oh, it continues to be challenging, right? It's a fairly small watershed. We've done a significant amount of implementation. We know that the practices will ultimately have the desired impact. And I think part of the challenge is just not having a complete understanding yet of how long it takes the phosphorus that's sort of in the system, right? That's already reached some of these small tributaries and also is sitting on the bottom of Lake Carmi. To work its way through the system and to see the true outcomes we're all looking for, which is reduced frequency and intensity of the harmful algal blooms that the lake unfortunately experiences. The aeration system is useful. We have some pretty intensive data that we've collaborated with UVM to collect out there and are going to continue that collaboration. that indicates it's working as intended in terms of keeping the bottom sediments oxidized and the phosphorus therefore stuck to the bottom and not available to the algae. But it hasn't had the same level of influence I think we fully anticipated in terms of the prevalence of those harmful algal blooms. And you're right, some of the technical and operating challenges around the system sort of seem to always happen at the most inopportune moments from a weather perspective, when conditions are really best for harmful algal blooms, but are committed to continuing the work needed both in the watershed as well as in the lake itself.
Okay, maybe this has been a topic of discussion in natural resources, Senator Westman, but anyway, the report came out, maybe 3 weeks ago, something like that, for our reading pleasure. Other questions of the secretary? Recognizing that, well, she still has a few more minutes, so we'll take advantage. Otherwise, we can go to the DEC budget
Great.
request.
Chrissy, am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you are.
Great. I am going to bring up the sort of one pager of our sort of summary of our budget that is sort of helpful for arranging our thinking and discussion of it.
So Commissioner, last year when you were going to hold 2 positions vacant, we started getting emails from, regarding those positions. Should we anticipate the same issue here? You've got annual vacancy savings. You were talking about 1 position maybe being held vacant for the year. I was just wondering if you could give us a bit more about that position and why, how you think you can accommodate that vacancy.
Sure.
And you don't need to do it now, but when you get to it.
No, we might as well get to it. That's kind of the key piece of operating budget challenge that we face is, as many of the programs that we fund have a variety. I mean, all of them have a pretty distinct variety and unique variety of funding sources. Many of the programs that we work to do our sort of clean water work, what we call our watershed management division, are heavily generally funded. Those, because our general fund doesn't have a sort of recurring sort of increase in funding, our federal funds have been largely flat or declining over the years. We have, we oftentimes that becomes a bit of a challenge in terms of how to fill that money. I will say that we've been, the governor proposed a significant increase in general fund dollars going to the department, and we're grateful for it. And it's offset other challenges that could have occurred without that. But that's sort of where we've come down. Generally, we rely on vacancy savings to meet our budget needs, but for most years that's on sort of a reasonable, as positions turn over sort of thing. They're naturally going to stay open for a month or 2 while we recruit for new positions. That's pretty normal. What we proposed last year was to do that and to hold 3 positions vacant. You provided us with some additional general funds to be able to fill those positions. But it hasn't reduced the sort of overall mounting pressure that we face on that section of our budget. And so unfortunately with general fund or with vacancy savings specific pieces, rather than, we don't like to talk about RIFs, right? But if a RIF allows us to prioritize where we reduce services, with using vacant positions, we can only hold open those positions that are vacant at the time to make sure that we can utilize those resources. The position that's being held vacant is one in our Lakes and Ponds program that has been the individual administering what's known as our Lake-Wise program that helps landowners around lakes and ponds help to manage their properties better for water quality. It's a very effective outreach program to communities. We are not stopping that program. We are going to spread those duties out amongst various people who work in the program already, to be able to spread that work out more on sort of a regional basis around the state. Those individuals are also responsible for our lake encroachment and shoreline permitting work. And so there will be an impact on the speed at which we can issue those permits. And there will be a bit of a drop off in the quality of the Lakewise program in terms of its consistency and the strength overall, but those are prioritization work that we have to make do with. There are certain things that you've told us we must do, and the Lakewise program is a great program, but it is not a sort of regulatory requirement or a statutory requirement. And so we're doing our best to work within the resources we have, but certainly it's not something we are excited about giving up, certainly.
Part of the reason that I'm asking is because of the, obviously the emails, your proposal last year, but in our public hearing, we did get numerous witnesses asking for increased funding of the conservation districts. And so it's, as we're weighing out, if we're in fact holding vacancy, in other words, it's sort of a within available revenues, trying to weigh out all the requests and where you're having to make choices. And if you were to say we're going to allocate more money, then you've got, we obviously have more people wanting more money than we have, but it's sort of like where would that first dollar go? And so that's part of why I'm asking the question that I am.
Yeah, I do understand that. I think we know that we are a single part of a larger sort of governor's recommend, and try to make sure that we account for the balancing work that the Agency of Administration and Finance and Management and the governor's office have done to try to come up with a budget that lives within those existing resources. So it's not an ideal position, but one we can manage if given this budget. So I don't have a whole lot more to add.
I wouldn't expect you to say otherwise, because I know how budgets are constructed, and I know how targets are given and how you have to make. And but I'm just saying, if we're in the position of saying where should additional money or where are savings being proposed that really might not be where we would say where we would make them, it's all part of that overall discussion as it were relating to water quality and land related conservation related activities. So you're probably not unaware that request has come in from the conservation districts, or maybe that's more in the ag realm, but everything transcends multiple departments.
Yep. No, and we've already started to see requests coming in from lake associations, for example, requesting that we find a way to fill that position. And we're not unsympathetic to the request, but we'll make do with what we've got. I do want to highlight a few things for you in here. This is useful, and this is the first page of our budget packet, so you've got all of this information. There's some interesting points that I wanted to flag. One is on the left-hand side on that chart in terms of where our funding source is coming from. That reflects our sort of base traditional budget. It does not include the ARPA dollars flowing through us, nor the positions associated with that Julie mentioned. And so just wanted to sort of flag that just in terms of trying to rectify where those pieces all come together. We have been incredibly successful in both developing and programs and deploying resources related to the ARPA clean water work. And that's the sort of general appropriations between the Clean Water Fund and the Clean Water Board related work and the direct to ANR work is roughly about $40 million in FY22. We have essentially programmed about 77% of that money already. Many of it has gone out, much of it has gone out, or some of it has gone out the door in terms of projects. A bunch of it has gone through the process whereby we've been deconflicting potential overlaps in projects and making sure that they're eligible with Guidehouse. And I'm incredibly proud of the team that has leaned into this and figured out how to get this money out the door for be transformational project for Vermonters. It's amazing to see. Every time I see that percentage, it blows me away. I mean, we're talking about essentially 6 months of time to, in many cases, develop entirely new programs and get RFIs and RFPs and program infrastructure and the people to do it and all those things in place and ready to go. It's amazing to see. So
for example, in last year we put all that ARPA into the end of the bill in G section. And so we had 115 million there for water and sewer improvements. It was over a multi-year period of time, including, the 3-acre stormwater permitting design and construction support. So that work is this is underway, I'm assuming. And there was quite a list. I think some of the towns or municipalities were hoping that there'd be more funding for actual upgrades or expansion of wastewater systems or whatever. Although I would think some of the new infrastructure money may, and if you could speak to that as well. I realize I'm sorry, I'm having a stream of consciousness here as you're trying to give your budget.
No, it's totally fine. I appreciate it. I think what was missing in our conversations the end of last session with the folks who would like to see the ARPA money be deployed differently is because we all knew that the infrastructure money was coming at some point. We didn't know what it was going to look like. The ARPA dollars and the IIJA dollars are not really fungible in the as the way they are in lots of folks' minds, as I know you understand well. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act money is really designed to fit within our existing programmatic work that's primarily run through the state revolving funds for clean water and drinking water work. There are some specific targeted pieces of that, such as work that is focused on emerging contaminants, where you should read, like in that, the per and polyfluoral alkylated, totally PFAS. I used to have that down pat. I'm a little embarrassed that I don't have that.
Maybe Senator Sears could help you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's $5 million or $8 million a year for the next 5 years to support that work on both the drinking water and the clean water side. There's money to support lead service line abatement, which is a huge challenge across the country and one in which the Congress and the president's really focused on, which is great to see, a longstanding problem. And so there's a number of things that are targeted within the IIJA money, but it is really sort of in that traditional water and sewer upgrades, improvements, normal activities within there. That was really the pieces that were missing for our communities who are like, but we've got this infrastructure and it's in poor condition and we need your help, right? And so I like to think of the distinction as sort of the ARPA being really targeted, focused work on things that have been left undone or unresourced over the years, or under-resourced. So if we think about, sort of the idea of addressing our CSO and SSO issues, our combined sewer overflow issues, addressing challenges in our villages where they can't support additional housing because there isn't room for additional on-site septic systems. And so creating opportunities for sort of village scale wastewater treatment facilities that can support that work, but that are too costly on a kind of per user basis to be able to do immediately. those are really transformational pieces. The 3-acre stormwater is another example of that. And so that to me is the distinction where the IIJ says historically and consistently we have under-resourced these major pieces of water and wastewater infrastructure, and now we're going to sort of really supercharge some of that work. So it's exciting across the board, but they really are very different in nature. Just want to reiterate that.
But they're complementary.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I do want to highlight two really things that I see as great initiatives within our budget. The first is, as I think I've talked with many of you about, is our wetlands mapping is relatively old and inconsistent because it was done with technology from, between the 70s and the 90s or 2000s pretty much, and is oftentimes there's a wetland on the ground that's not mapped, and so somebody might not know that they were supposed to come to us to get a permit. Happens pretty regularly. We've been working to update we've been working to update maps over time as we have resources. We've been getting some federal grants to do it. I'm pleased that the governor budget invests $250,000 in one-time general funds for us to get to the point where those maps are all up to date, and then invests a further $150,000 a year to maintain those maps, because that the wetlands are not static. They morph, they change with the flows of water over the course of time. And so we want to make sure that those are up to date so that Vermonters have a better sense of what's on their property and can follow the rules as they want to and not be caught flat-footed when something happens that they weren't aware of. And so that's a really important piece that I'm excited to see move forward. I can't remember whether I spoke to you all about this last year, but we created a system during the pandemic with CRF money around what we called our permit navigator, which was essentially an online resource where you could go in, say where your project was going to be, answer a series of logic-based questions, and it would spit out sort of what permits you might need and who to contact. And we'd like to take that to the next step. You included some resources last year in the budget, but as we've gone through it, we've realized that we need some support in terms of ongoing licensing costs and other things. And so the governor's budget recommends a $400,000 base increase in our budget to be able to do the licensing that's associated with that, so we can use it to its fullest. What we anticipate that sort of second phase being is Joanna's team has been working for years developing our online permit applications. And so if we think about the permit navigator as the kind of front end into the system and the permit applications being the sort of the meat of it, we want those to connect.
5. This
And
meeting
then-
ID does not exist. Please
and then we want
re-enter
the
your
ability
meeting ID
to-
followed by pound.
This meeting does not exist according to the recording. I don't know who. Senator Starr, did you get bumped off again? Probably.
I don't really know. I think so.
Oh.
It's not a good sign if you don't know.
I've had
Okay.
a day.
Oh.
And then
Peter,
that
have
would
you heard that we have a new startup company? Actually, they used to do E911, and it's called Whiteout, and they're doing all kinds of mapping and LiDAR technology, with drones and, aerial work. And they did, I guess, a survey of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. I was just wondering if you were familiar with, it's a Vermont company. It's and it's based in, in Lindenville, unless they've moved their office. So I was just wondering if, when we were talking about mapping and so forth, it's interesting the technology that's now available to do that work.
in my previous educational experience, I was a geography person and loved that stuff. And so I'm really amazed at what we're capable of doing with LiDAR and drones like to give us an idea of what's going on in something that we had sort of knew or didn't know was happening. We're doing that in really interesting places in partnership with VTrans that has their own drone unit around looking at geological issues associated with like Smuggler's Notch and where we have seen rock slides in the past to be able to kind of interpret risk for future landslides. And so it's really interesting. We also had there's a Army aerial, I can't remember what their name is, but they're sort of a team that does those sorts of mapping and survey work. And they were looking to do a training mission to kind of help them plan, and they needed a mountainous terrain. And so they asked us if we wanted them to come fly anything for us and look at things. And we had them do Smuggler's Notch and the Waterbury Dam, and also, and got a good look at a bunch of different places that gave us a really detailed look at what's happening. And so we can evaluate things moving forward. It's pretty cool. But I haven't heard of that company, but I'm glad to see that work is happening here in Vermont. That's exciting.
Yeah, it might be worth checking out a website and seeing what they have for services. Might as well give a plug for Vermont firm.
Heck yeah.
And startup.
We've been thinking a lot about how to integrate that work. And so if there are Vermont-based companies that we can utilize, there's a really good program at UVM that helps us at times as well. And so there's a lot of good local work happening. It's great.
So now we're down to additional ARPA funding of 69.5 million.
Correct. So as I mentioned above, in terms of the amount of money that we've gotten out the door or gotten programmed and sort of moving along, we have included in this year's budget the sort of remainder of what the governor's original recommended ARPA funds would be. Last year we sort of broke that out last year in terms of which fiscal years it would fall into, and you gave us essentially what was 22 and then a little bit of clean water, some additional money that was sort of to be spread over 23 and 24. Our proposal would be to ask you to appropriate the remainder of those funds so that we can keep the pipeline moving, because we have had so much interest for these programs, and it's a lot easier for us if we know that we know the funds are coming and we can work through them and get things moving and under contract.
So we had, and let me tell you, I don't have this all memorized, but I have a good file system. So we gave carry forward 50 million, and that I think is what you're referring to. 20 million for allocation by the Clean Water Board through 23-24, and then the other was 30 million for allocation in 23 and 24 for drinking water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure projects. So the 69 million is a bit more. Is the governor proposing to add more than what was identified in the FY22 budget?
So I believe that is it's a mixing of streams, and maybe Joanna or Tracy, I think Joanna might have had to drop off, so it might just be Tracy. I think that reflects both the dollars that you would directly appropriate to DEC and those that you run through our budget to the Clean Water Board. And so that might be where the discrepancy comes about.
Okay, well, we'll look at it, but what we had was that multi-year, and you just really want to move it, make it all available now in 23, and with the understanding that it's 23-24, but it's to get projects going, moving as fast as possible and out the door.
Yes.
And that can happen faster if you know the full amount of money and work within it.
Yes. So, I mean, let's use the example of, a lot of these projects are bigger projects. If we can fund 2.5 with 1 year appropriation, but we could do all 5 that have come to apply with both of those full years of appropriation. I'd rather get all of those projects moving so that we can, because they're big infrastructure projects, they take time, they take local work. We should, and frankly, people are going to need to line up a lot of big yellow equipment that is a bit hard to come by these days, and so, because of all of the demand. And so to be able to fit that in as they're able to over a 2-year period is much easier than trying to do it.
Good. Jane,
Okay.
Can I?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Bob.
Bobby, and then Senator Sears.
how do we work that in so it would be good for 24? If, the year 24, if we're doing 23 budget.
Well, that's what they're asking, is really to combine it and authorize the spending all at once. And then, so they could be, if they could, get projects started, not be artificially constrained by that multi-year kind of construct, I think which I think is exactly what you're talking about, Bob.
So the money would be appropriated in the 23 budget, but the completion date would stretch into 24, something like that, because I didn't think we could obligate a future legislature. That's
Well,
all.
yeah, well, we can, and we've got it for allocation in fiscal year 23 and 24. We don't have it broken down that it has to be. So I don't know. It's interesting how we want to read our own language here. It looks like you could, allocate it. It doesn't indicate that it has to be split equally. It doesn't have anything. So it looks like it could be all spent and you could have $10 left for 24. I don't know. We'll take a look at that. The other, clarification that came from Treasury not long ago, and that was the ARPA money that went to cities and towns, and clarification that money could also be used for this kind of project. Are you seeing, or do you anticipate when you're getting these applications that you'll be seeing kind of a merging of funding that the towns received with this, or do you think the towns are going to say, well, now that the money's there, we want to use it for some other capital improvement? Do you have a sense of how the 2 funding streams might merge for water sewer projects?
I would
And
say
then
that,
Senator Sears.
just quickly, every project we fund has usually 5 or 6 different funding streams associated with it. And so we're used to working with communities to help find them the resources, whether that be USDA or other activities that help them along, whether some of that's bonded money, whether that's loans, grants from us, et cetera. So we're good at working through that sort of funding stack with communities. And so if they have resources that they'd like to bring to bear from the ARPA money, that's great. We'd like to encourage that. But from their own monies, we certainly will continue to make available what we can. And I think they would still need additional beyond what we've got to offer anyways. And so they've got to find that somewhere. And so, we'll work with them to find that, certainly.
Okay. Senator Sears.
Yeah, I hate to be like, what have you done for me lately? Because as you know, what you and your folks in your agency did for Bennington and Shaftesbury and North Bennington, following the St. Gobain and getting the water lines extended, all of that was just fantastic. And putting up with some of my constituents who were less than happy with some of the developments and the patience and all that. So I hate to be a what have you done for me lately, but I'm wondering if any of these funds could be used to help some of the folks who weren't able to be helped through the St. Gobain settlement and still live within the area of contamination or just outside of it.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate that. And as I said to you previously, I think the work that we all collectively did in your communities, some of the best work I've been a part of in government. and really appreciative of the community's engagement there. So thank you for that. I think, as we've talked about a little bit, I think the IIJA money is most well suited potentially towards addressing some of those issues, especially as they relate to PFAS contamination, and potentially that $8 million a year for 5 years that I mentioned. And I'm happy to talk about it more with you offline. I do
Okay.
understand that there are ongoing concerns from members of your community. The settlement that we reached was generally incredibly positive, but it didn't resolve all issues across the board. So.
Okay, it'd be good to have that conversation. There's still a number of people who, maybe after the session, a community meeting of some type, to just work with some of those folks.
Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to start thinking through those things.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions
I
of the commissioner?
I have one that's kind of local.
Oh, what a surprise. Okay,
Yeah.
Senator Starr.
I know, Peter, you folks have been working with Montgomery and was just wondering how that was coming along on a wastewater system.
You know, I think to the point I made earlier about the sort of stacking of different funding sources, the Montgomery is a sort of a case in point. And because each of those funding streams has different requirements, it can sometimes be a challenge to figure out how they all fit together and which is the last dollar in and that sort of thing. I am confident that we will resolve any lingering issues and that we'll have a great project to put on the ground there. And I'm happy to check in on the details of where that stands and get back to you if you'd like.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we can, do you have more slides, Commissioner?
I don't, but you do have a question. Senator Westman's had his hand
No,
up. for a
what
while.
I was thinking is if we're done with the slide, maybe
Oh,
we
yeah, let me
could
take it
just,
off.
yeah, then I could see my committee a little
There we go.
better.
Sorry about that.
I'm sure they're anxious to see me. So Senator Westman, you had a question?
So, and I'm sorry I was late today. I had a little emergency. But, so the federal infrastructure money that's coming down that will be eligible, I'm interested in, we're taking the 69 and you characterize it as big projects. We have a lot of small communities that can't get ready for these projects ready. I have, I'll use case in point. They took some of the ARPA money that went to the local community in North Hyde Park, which has a whole bunch of failed septic systems, are now putting stuff into design. A lot of the larger communities are able to afford to get their projects designed and move them along. And as we move through the ARPA money into the federal infrastructure money, I'm worried that we aren't doing enough to help small communities do their engineering and get ready to apply for the grants. And so your characterization of let's get the 69 out to bigger projects in bigger places worries me a little.
Yeah.
There'll only be crumbs left for a more smaller rural towns.
Well, the small rural towns don't have the capacity to do the engineering.
Mhm.
So I apologize if that was the sense I conveyed to you. They are big projects for small communities. So when we think about the Montgomery project, which is I think in the sort of $10 million range, that's a huge project for a small community.
Yeah.
And it's a game-changing project for that community. It is not if you were to do that project in a larger community, it would be, $100 million. This is the Village Water and Wastewater Initiative, which is the sort of the piece where the Montgomery things come from, is specifically designed to help these smaller communities who can't, who simply constrained by the available land resources to further build out any sort of septic based development. And so they can't have the economic development, they can't have the new housing, they can't have all those things that would be needed. But, you know, as with a current, you know, sort of user capacity of 60 residences, are not going to be able to afford to build an $8 million, you know, in-ground treatment system. And so really what we've been trying to do is to get those things, those projects really done. I would say that the money that we've had for years has done a good job of getting people through design, or the sort of initial phases of design. It's the cost per user of the project itself, and the local energy it takes to get over the sort of hurdles of handling a project of this scale that really holds people back. And so we've done some really nice partnerships with ACCD and the Northern Borders Regional Commission to try to move projects forward that speak to exactly that challenge of a community knows what it needs in order to overcome these challenges. They simply don't have the resources, either financial or just sort of project management, to get the project moving. And it can be overwhelming for a small community. So I'm sorry that I gave that impression that this was big projects for, you know, in the eyes of bigger communities. The bigger communities know how to bond and get loans from us and do the work they need to do, and they're good about those things. Obviously, they're going to come back to me and say we can't afford them either, and they're not wrong, but they have the sort of managerial skills and the financial skills to move those things forward. The smaller communities, that's where the challenges lie, and so that's really where we focused.
Well, it is that engineering, getting them ready. Because if I have the big chunk of money coming along for federal infrastructure money, you know, because I see the number 69, how much of that is going to help the engineering and get these smaller places to a place where they're ready to move on projects, particularly if I know there's money coming out there. You know, you bring up Montgomery, how many of them is there, and how can I be, because the small places are never going to be in a position to be able to, if they lose out on this, they're going to lose out for years to come.
Are we talking about wastewater primarily, septic, sewage treatment?
It's primarily, but there's both. They're both drinking
But
water.
they're
types,
both.
Okay.
Um,
Because
So-
we did give you 10 million to help with, or 8 million for the design and construction up to 10 community scale. So this was wastewater, or
Yeah,
both
so that's-
water and
that's the-
wastewater.
That's the village water and wastewater program that I spoke to. Senator
Yeah.
Westman, what this $69 million doesn't include is the millions of dollars that we bring to the table for design and construction outside of ARPA dollars. And I would be happy to put all of that together and describe to you the monies that we're investing in design for communities to be ready. That's why a community like Montgomery is ready to move towards construction, is because we've supported them in the past with design funds to be able to be ready.
I'd be interested to see that. And I'd be interested to see, since we have ARPA money now that we can use for that to get ready for the infrastructure, of what kind of outreach we're making to these small communities.
That raises the larger question, Commissioner, and that is, we're all talking, you know, what we know within our particular district. And I don't know whether the RPCs are, you know, have a involvement here, but certainly, you know, like the little town of Fairleigh has no wastewater system, and that's constraining its growth. There's no question about it. It's stuck between Connecticut River and, you know, cliffs. And so do we have a sense in terms of what out of all the communities or towns in Vermont, even a sense of what that need might be? What ones have already facilities? Some have them, but they're inadequate versus those that don't have anything. Is there any way, do you have a sense of overall what that looks like statewide?
I don't have a perfect sense by any stretch of imagination, but it's certainly something that our teams have been working on with the RPCs and others for years to try to understand that. And certainly I can pull together what we've got and share that with you. That I don't think it's going to be perfect, but it's, it's kind of what we're aware of. And we do test that with the RPCs and with communities directly, but obviously it's not perfect. I will say that we have the piece that I left out of the work that we've done on the ARPA piece was the extensive rollout of that information to different communities, different stakeholders in this process, the RPCs, the League of Cities and Towns, making those resources available. We have a form on our website where people can, if you're a community that says, I'm as you develop more information on this program, I'd like more information and keep me on the list. We've had lots of great conversations with folks, and so I think it's gone well. Public outreach and community outreach is never sufficient, but I think this one has been done pretty well. And so, but Senator Westman and others, if you're hearing from your communities that they want to know how to access those things, please send them to me and I will help get them connected with the right people.
One of the things that we did fund was money to the league and to our RPCs to assist the towns, knowing the complexity of the funding sources and the different potential streams. And so that's part of the question too, in terms of another resource available to support the towns, because they readily admit, and we've gotten really a very positive feedback about the benefit to having that resource. And I suppose it also helps on your end as well to have, if some of that work or some of the exploratory or explanation can be done in advance. But needless to say, they're requesting more continuation of funding simply because of the fact that the funding is going to be over a multi-year period of time, and they expect the need for that kind of technical support is going to continue.
And I would say that they're, that work that they're doing is all sort of the projects that they need. And so it dovetails nicely with the IIJ money, which could be used to do other projects, right? And so we worked very closely with Katie Buckley at the League, who's been a tremendous asset for the League to have to help the communities with. And so we would certainly be supportive of that ask, because that partnership has been really, really good.
Well, that's good. Thank you. It's nice to hear. I've heard it from the towns, but it's also nice to hear that it is beneficial on both ends.
It's been vital to have a partner to sort of help us course correct our communications as we need to be a funnel for comments that they're hearing, for us to send information through them. They have members that pay more attention to things that come from them than come from us. And it's been a very, very good partnership.
And they've done a whole lot of webinars. I've seen.
So we've done a bunch of those with them, and it's been really good.
All right, so we have a plug for continued support for our towns, and we do have that request from the League, and I know we have the funding request for RPCs as well. This is wonderful. Other questions of the committee? We've kind of been all over the map, but it's a great opportunity to get information and get an update and have you respond to and give us a sense of what's ahead. Other questions of the commissioner?
So can I review quickly some of the questions that I've got and just make sure that I have my sort of follow-ups back to you all squared away?
Sure.
Senator Sears, I'll be in touch about the potential for IIJA funds for Bennington waterline extensions. Senator Starr, I'll find out where Montgomery stands and where we think what the next steps are. Senator Westman, I will bring in some more details about the sort of full spectrum of our work in the supporting the design work to get projects ready to access these sorts of monies. And Senator Kitchell, I'll see what we have in terms of the overall need for these types of projects around the state.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Other questions of the commissioner? Let me ask one area that we've been kind of looking at, and that is your department gets some of your revenues from fees. What can you give us a sense of what is the revenues from fee generated revenues?
I am drawing a blank as we say this, but I bet you Tracy can pull off the percentage of it. I think it's about 10% of our overall budget, if that.
Our permit fees are about 10%. Yeah.
Okay.
But as a reminder, our budget is a lot of pass through. So it's not necessarily 10% of our sort of more operationally focused budget.
No. But it does, the fact that we haven't done any fee increases for 6 years is having an impact on the revenues. We're seeing it particularly in transportation. And is there an estimate, and maybe it's premature, in terms of what the general fund or what the state match requirements would be for the infrastructure bill?
Yes, and we included those requests as part of the capital bill adjustment. So where Secretary Moore is off working with your colleagues to try to work on those pieces.
So it's all out of the 113. Well, that's the 113 capital bill. I'm talking about the match that's going to be needed for the infrastructure bill.
Yes. So traditionally we pull down capital bill dollars to be the match for the federal capitalization grants for the state revolving loan funds that we have included in the FY23 capital bill adjustment act work to included the additional what we assess to be the amount needed to pull down the additional funds, so that we have factored that in so that we can have that money hit the ground running as soon as it's available.
But the capital bill so we're going to bond for the state match?
That's been the traditional path to.
Okay. For those new federal dollars?
Yes. Tracy, I might be mistaken and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know whether those ended up in the I can't remember what the name of the fund that the governor proposed, which was more of a pay-go model for those pieces. Do you remember which one those ended up in?
I'm not sure either.
Okay.
We can get back to you on that.
Okay. Oh, well, if we have a joint fiscal staff, if Stephanie's listening, she probably can help figure it out. There's just, there's so many different sort of buckets that are at work here. And so there is, what we're looking at is part of it is that 113 million ARPA capital, 113 million capital construction. And then there's the infrastructure money. And so I didn't know whether, so the plan is, if it's in the capital bill, then normally the general fund is bonded, but we'll have to sort that out. So I didn't, it's getting down into the weeds, and I don't expect it. You'd necessarily know it off to the top of your head.
But I would hope that we aren't bonding to come up with the money to match this federal money. I mean, but well,
in transportation, we might do that, and it might make a whole lot of sense, because if you've only got that money for a period of time, it is a way of spreading out, the financing on the state side to leverage every dollar. But part of that was the purpose of, but we set up a special, as Senator Westman knows, that TIB fund mechanism very specifically for transportation, but the other areas of match are something we're concerned about, and that's part of why we constructed the BAA the way we did, was to have general fund available to help support and provide match as these federal dollars require. And it's hard in some areas, hard to predict, because you're going to apply, you're going to have, some are competitive grants, some are coming through your regular, funding structure. And so it's really kind of a mixture.
Yes, I'll
Like a
add
sewer-
a couple. Sorry, Senator.
Like a sewer project that's gonna last 30 years, that would be one thing if you only had to use, some bonding money along with ARPA or federal
Yeah.
money. But on roads, a lot of our money goes into asphalt and, if you're gonna rebuild a road that was gonna last for a long time. But
Yeah,
short-
well, there are limitations in the bonding and what it's for that very reason. Yeah. Other questions of the commissioner?
So
I guess I guess you don't have a lot of time to put your feet up and think big. It sounds like you've really got a lot of work ahead of you.
we are getting out of business and trying to work through some very challenging but important topics, and so we never lack for work, that's for sure. I will just add a couple of things. One, the match requirement for what that I was really talking about was on the drinking water and clean water side of things. And those match requirements are much lower, or they're lower than they are traditionally, which is helpful, because it would be not very nice to give us a slug of money that we can't afford to draw down.
What is it, 80-20 or?
I think it's better than that, and I can get those details for you.
Okay.
It's different depending on the specific pot, so that's why I can't tell you precisely.
Yeah.
And then however, in the IIJA, there is also additional resources for things like brownfield cleanups, which we have not budgeted the match for yet, because we don't necessarily know precisely what that need is going to be. So that will be something that we'll need to come speak with you about again eventually.
Okay. All right. Thank
Jane,
you.
I think the match for Montgomery and Hyde Park are like 95.5. Right, Peter?
It probably depends on which of the 5 funding streams you're talking about. 95.5.
Sounds like
Is that
I'm in a
wishful
negotiation here.
I think Senator Starr is setting up his own match formula for his
I-
district.
I think he can afford that. I mean, the 5%, he'd just give it to the town of Montgomery, and that's kind of a campaign donation. He's got his campaign fund.
Other questions? Rich, you all set? You probably had more detail in natural resources. So
We actually haven't covered any of this in that.
oh, you haven't? Oh, well, then you've already had a primer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we really do need to schedule this in natural resources.
Particularly when we're, the whole nexus with what we are doing through our water quality and that whole initiative, and then what this additional money will mean, and try to get a sense of it. The other thing that we were going to get the link on, and that's the updated report in terms of the progress being made by Watershed in terms of the water quality improvements.
We have a lot of those water quality district people in into ag, dealing with farm water quality stuff. And
Well, it's helpful to know by watershed, and it also was sort of it gave you a listing of the interventions and the funding as well. So it was a nice, it was a very efficient way of giving information to us. I think Rebecca Ellis helped put it together originally.
Well, we are at Center Westman. I look forward to chatting more about bringing this to Center Natural Resources and Energy, and we'll bring in a team of folks that could include Emily Bird and the team rolling out ARPA dollars and thinking about IIJA, and so that everybody has all their questions answered at once. But we are primed and ready to get to work and look forward to it.
Great. Okay. Well, gee, it's 20 of 3 and it's a Friday afternoon. And
Senator Sears has got to drive home to Bennington.
A long ride.
well, I needed to finish up by 3 because I have to be in St. Johnsbury for an appointment. So it actually gives me just a little bit more time, which is kind of nice. So unless we have more questions of the commissioner and his staff, I'm going to adjourn the committee for the week.
Great.